Hi, this session is on strategic performance reviews and how to avoid common mistakes. So, would today be successful for you if you gain some insight, some tools, and different ways of doing performance reviews that might work even better? So specifically, get some insights in the classic view of performance reviews. I have some options to share an alternative approach and some tools you can use either way. Your commitment is, hey, if you don't like it, don't tell anyone, leave the session gracefully and quietly. But if you like it, share with some other people and try it. And if you love it, celebrate it. Tell everybody, consider calling me to help if I can help you and your team. So where are we going today? Well, it's a different approach and to achieve a different outcome. So what we'll review is the major measures of success, a current Wall Street view versus the traditional Main Street approach on this. Sort of it's a highway. It's not a one-way road. There's a lot of different ways to get there, and why the classic approach often fails. And the value for you, hopefully, regardless, is, at least you'll have some options to consider. Possibly shift from focus on the past to the future in terms of what the performance view is designed to do. Dismantle, I'm going to suggest dismantling the tie of compensation and promotions to performance reviews. I'll share why. How to incorporate values that are important to the culture. The idea of having quarterly snapshots that replace annual deep dives, and frankly, design that it rewards appropriate pivots in what changes during the year and priorities that change during the year. So what are the basics, the inputs and outputs that go into performance reviews? Well, inputs, right, that support the review. One is, what's going on out there for the business, the situation, the trends with clients and alliances and suppliers and government, all the different constituencies that can affect any, the company and the particular requirements of the responsibilities. Two is you get internal decisions, strategies and structures and the systems on how things get done and the skills of the people and the styles and, the staff and what makes this company special. And that all affects people and what they do and how they do it. And then foundational. What are the dreams of the company and the individuals and the mission, the vision, the strategies, the culture? All those things affect the performance review. And the outputs, theoretically, are you get an individual career plan, right? So how to leverage your strengths, how to protect your weaknesses and improve them, get development time, training, whatever. Two is it's a way of engaging the team, with strategies that attract and motivate and retain talent. And good performance reviews help you scale for exceptional growth. They're strategic, and they align responsibilities, they help hold people accountable, and they demonstrate and improve processes to get things done. So, look, if the classic approach is working for you, if you guys do annual reviews, don't change. I mean, if they're working for you, the typical approach can be effective sometimes, right? So if you're doing them now, great. Things are going well, stay the course. If you need to freshen up, consider an evolution, not a revolution of what you're doing. So the objective today is just to enhance your insight and to give you some other options to consider. See other ways that a lot of the Fortune 500 companies have now evolved to and how they do performance reviews, which is very, very different than what they used to do 5-10 years ago. So what is that classic approach? Performance reviews. Well, it's a process that evaluates employees' work, how they're doing, giving them feedback. Frequency, it's typically annual, and it's usually somewhat formal, often in the boss's office. And it supports, in that session, goal setting between the two and how that person will develop, training and different areas to focus on, whatever. So an analogy would be, it's like an annual physical with your doctor. So the insight for the individual is, a better idea of what's expected from the boss. They gain some insight and they meeting expectations. And theoretically, hopefully, they got agreements on opportunities for that person to grow and a strategy to correct issues that the boss or the organization may have. The process, to get ready for the performance reviews. Typical is the manager, the supervisor, the boss gathers the facts. Theoretically, they're gathering them in a file throughout the year if they're disciplined enough to do that, rather than wait till near the end. They document activity, impressions as they see them. They gather information, measurements and reports and stuff. They have a formal meeting, and they give feedback, and they discuss things, and they commit to action steps, and then they follow up, ideally, with implementation, make sure the employee followed up on those action steps and agreements and where they're going, and as a result, helping the employee develop. So what are some of the best practices with the classic approach? One is actually involve the employee in developing the performance review. Make it more of an exchange versus presenting the performance review to the employee. And that way, make sure it's not a surprise that everything's discussed. They've been discussing it through the year. Nothing there is a surprise in the annual review. It's more a repeat of expected and documentation. In gathering information, well, best practices are keep notes, keep a file throughout the year. Some organizations have the employees write and then they discuss progress reports, that are short and concise. So it's a way of doing informal reviews almost on a monthly basis. Ask for the employees to do their own review and then compare and contrast. That creates trust and more collaboration working on it together. And you might even have them do a 360 feedback. So it's not just the boss giving the review, they're getting feedback from all over, below, above, sideways, peers, whatever. And that usually ends up with better information. And then evaluating performance, right? You want to make sure you synthesize it so it has a core theme to the review. Your job in the review is to make the complex simple for them to understand and move from there. So what's typical criteria? Well, most performance review talk about, did they take initiative, right? Are they asking good questions? Are they collaborating with other teammates? Making sure they're jumping in and assuming risk together, assuming gain together. How well are they communicating with other people and those that need to know what they're doing and why they're doing it? And are they focused or, disciplined and doing the right things? How productive are they in getting things done? Do they have the knowledge they need, or could that even be improved about the products and services and the industry, whatever? And are they reliable when they ask for something? Can you rely it's going to be done? And frankly, are they improving? So some more best practices. When you give feedback, keep the end in mind. Ask yourself, what will the employee's overall takeaway be when they go back to their job? What will their perceptions be about this meeting? What will their feelings be? Right? Ideally, you want to be positive. You want to share specific issues and thoughts, but tie them to the big picture outcomes. What are the outcomes you desire? Not how to do it, but the result of what they do. And avoid the negative trap, which is very common in performance reviews, right? Avoid the detail and assumptions. That just legally can create liability, and stay unemotional, and it's not a debate, right? And be careful of the but that's defensive. That's not geared at helping the employee grow. Think about it this way. Think of it in a car. Most performance reviews are like driving looking through the rear view mirror. I like to think of the performance reviews as just the opposite. The rearview mirror is some perspective, but the goal of the performance review is out the windshield to help improve the future. So most performance reviews are past-oriented. I like to make them future-oriented. So about the meeting, share again prior to the meeting, reinforce here's why we're doing it, and reinforce ideally, I'd like it to be you're doing some self-appraisal and this is how I'm going to conduct the process, and these are the milestones of what's going to happen, so they know what's going on. And then schedule in advance a convenient time, generally 60 minutes. Ideally, don't do it in your office. That comes across more authoritarian and less a discussion. And you want to minimize anxieties, Reinforce the objective, the purpose. The purpose ought to be out the front windshield. The focus is on the future and helping them achieve what's in their interest and the company's interest. Ask for input. That way you're assuring it's fair and that you've got their perspective and it's more valuable overall and there's clarity, whether you agree on everything or not. Conduct the session with their self-view. Do as much as you can through questions versus telling them. What did you think? How do you think you could improve? What things went well? What did? And ask for feedback. Clarify at the end things you agreed to and perceived gaps, and that's okay. And the next step, set up SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, mean they're important, and when, the time they should be occurred by, and then document it. Some suggestions to consider: listen and understand before being understood. Lead through as much questions as you can. Find out what they think they believe was good. Find out what they think they believe can be improved. Add things that you think they left out, especially on the positive side, to reinforce. And be understood. Probe. What are they proud of? What do they wish they could do over again? What lessons did they learn? By doing that, often you're getting through the questions, they're helping themselves, and you're not coming across as a cop, you're coming across as an advocate. The key is understanding the QBQ. That means the question behind the question. So when they answer a question, listen to it, and then use things like, I think I understand, can you add a little bit more? Or this is what I heard you say, what am I missing? Types of restatement that get them adding more information to what they already shared. And what the amazing thing you'll find out is when people run out of facts in their answers is normally where the gold is, the emotional experience they're trying to avoid or gain, which is what drives most decisions. Discuss the situations, not the character. In other words, don't discuss their thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. Discuss the situation and the observed behaviors. Because the minute you go to thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, they're going to get defensive and not hear most of what you're saying. And celebrate successes. Try to add to the ones that they brought up to demonstrate, yeah, you're really trying to help them. You're reinforcing their strengths. I mean, a key thing is most performance reviews focus on the negative. You can't fix people, so it's sort of crazy to focus on the negative. On the things that aren't as strong, look at those as the Achilles heel. Work together to see how you can protect them better. But focus most of the discussion on most of the people, on what they're doing great and how that can affect the future for them and the organization. So why even have a classic approach? Why bother? Well, it has some benefits. People like it because it enhances the position clarity, what their roles are, what their responsibilities are. They have a better understanding of what they expect from their boss, from the organization. Theoretically, it increases productivity of the individuals and the groups. Some people believe it does that. I frankly don't think that often does that. Statistics show that it's often doesn't, but some people believe it. Helps build capabilities because you're improving feedback and allows leaders to be better coaches. It assures team alignment because if it's built in with core values and with goals and strategy, everybody through that annual process has a better sense of the values and goals and what the company's doing. It supports decision making on promotions and pay. Frankly, employees generally associate the entire business, the performance review, as a decision-making tool for promotions and pay. Theoretically, it can improve relationships with the organization, the individual, and it can lower liability when you document it and you protect the process and do it appropriately. And that's a classic approach and classic beliefs, and I'm not going to say it's wrong, but I have some questions on some of it for me personally. So think about it. I think the classic approach, I've seen it backfire. Why? Well, you talk to people that hate it. What do they say? Well, different people in the organization, different bosses and leaders review very differently. Some, they're super nice, and some are focused on being very accurate. And so, therefore, if I'm reviewed by one manager and someone else is reviewed by another manager, it might not seem fair. Statistically, engagement by employees drops in 80%. Now, I don't mean they're not doing their job, and don't mean they're not getting things done, but their thought process of how to improve and what to do differently and what's going on, statistically, that engaged mind drops, their participation drops for about 3 months for about 80% of people. Most importantly, they hate it because it defines their worth. Once a year, they take the entire review and all the things you discussed, but you know what they remember? The one number that consolidates it all, and that's seen as their value. And frankly, they hate it because the situation reality. Things often change during the year of what's important. And so now when you're doing the review, a lot of it, does it really make sense that that's what we're reviewing? But people like it, love it. They love the fact that it's quantifiable and they can identify trends in big companies. They love those measurements and the analysis. It certainly saves time for leaders doing it only once a year, and it does identify skill gaps to help people improve. But again, you can protect their Achilles heel. You can't fix people. So again, research demonstrates post-review employee engagement, their active looking to improve and participate, generally drops off. So the truth is, some people love performance reviews, some hate them. And I'm just going to share some other options to consider. But let's use an analogy. Let's just think about what a performance review is sort of like. And ask yourself, how effective is that? So here's an analogy. We get this marriage. And it's a pretty good marriage. It progresses through the years. You know, life happens. There's some ups and some downs. There's some sideways things. But they decide that once a year, he's going to rate the marriage and she's going to rate the marriage. And they're going to share those performance reviews. And they're going to have action plans. And what are the implications? So here's my question to consider. Does an annual review adequately flex to the rapid changes and realities of your business? And would even just adding simple quarterly snapshots, highlighting, talking about the status of major initiatives and how to be more efficient and effective, so it's forward-looking rather than criticizing behind. Use the behind as examples and benchmarks for moving forward, but be the advocate on how that information is going to help in the future, not a view of what we weren't satisfied with in the past. For most people, not all people, and I'll get into that in a second. So how does it backfire? Well, can it come across dishonest? Is it often perceived, even if not intended, to be negative? Or, like I said, who's doing the review? Is it even fair compared across the organizations? Especially because performance reviews are generally directly tied to compensation, incentives, and promotions. And employees generally absolutely believe that. But frankly, is that really the truth? Tell me if this isn't true. Performance is actually only a small component of what goes into pay increase decisions. When I was doing them, one is, can we afford? What can we afford? Based on how the company is performing, and frankly, how that department's performing, and also, a piece of how the individual performed, and the value of their responsibilities. Affordability. What's going on out there? That has a bigger effect on how much we can give as a compensation increase. The individual performance is just a piece of it. And tell me if this isn't true. only a small component goes into your decisions on who's getting promoted, right? I was promoting a lot of different people. Well, what are my resource priorities? Do I even have promotions to give? What's my business forecast? Am I going to have to cut back, or are there promotion availabilities? Yeah, the individual's performance plays a role in that. But I got other people in the organization too, and that affects who gets promoted. And again, affordability of promotions and a lot of other things. So what are the implications? Doesn't tying performance reviews directly to paying promotions, isn't it? A, it's somewhat dishonest. B, it's a danger of damaging relationships between the employee and their manager because it's viewed as we're negotiating and I want better, and if you thought of me better, I'd be making more. That's not the case, and from a relations standpoint, it doesn't lend itself to advocacy, and I'm trying to help you. And think of that overall consolidated number. That one number triggers when they walk out of the room. This is what they thought of me. And it distracts from all the details of strengths and how to minimize or put protection around the Achilles heels, their weaknesses. Isn't that dangerous? And is it really truthful? And is it helpful to the organization moving forward? So I got a toolbox that you might want to consider, and it might help. You may adopt some of it, a little of it, none of it, or all of it. But let me share some things. Shift the goal. Utilize the performance review to drive insight about the future and how we make the future even better and what our strategy is. Make sure they understand our strategy and the role they play in our future, and make sure they understand the teamwork and what's going on and how we get things done to be better in the future, and reinforce the key elements of our culture that are important to us and how they relate to the employee in the organization in the future. Tell me if you've ever seen this. The owner walks into the senior manager meeting one day, and they're upset. They go, why are they upset? Well, they say, everyone is ignoring the company values. I got those posted. We spent so much time as a team creating the company values. And the manager goes to one of the employees, or all the employees, so you tell me, what are our company values? And what often happens? Crickets. Because people know them sort of conceptually, but they don't really know them because they don't use them every day in guiding their decisions and behaviors. So what's the implication? If what you want is not reviewed, especially at the performance reviews, and tied in as aspects of the reviews, well, then there's no accountability to those things you want. Frankly, it signals that company values must not be that important. And frankly, it wastes a lot of time. What's in view is what people do. If you do quarterly performance reviews not tied to compensation and promotions, but tied indirectly or a small piece, I mean, that's an obvious, but not directly, you have an opportunity. Build into those understanding and feedback, forward-looking why it's helpful on the values. So you're making them real. So regardless of which approach you use, you have choices to make. Here's a checklist of a few key choices, regardless of how you do the reviews, annually, quarterly, no matter what you do. Right? One is, what's it going to be used for? Most typically, it's for decision making, pay, promotion, and assignments. What do I think's a little better? Capability. Ways that we can leverage your strengths and protect your Achilles heels to help you achieve what you want to achieve, aligned with what the company is trying to achieve in the department. It's being a good coach. Second thing you're going to make decisions on is what's measured, because that's the focus. Most performance reviews focus on the behavior, but they weave into it what they believe are that person's thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. And by the way, as an equation, thoughts, feelings, beliefs drive behavior. But when you talk about thoughts, feelings, and beliefs and assume those, they're just going to be defensive. But typically, performance reviews are seen by others as sort of subjective. What are things preferred? Focus on the results that make sense at that situation as they evolve. In other words, performance review may include the fact that the objective changed. There was a major pivot, and the fact that they took initiative to change it. That's a preferred result versus reviewing the original objective. So try to make it more objective. Focus on the outcomes you're trying to achieve and focus on what you're trying to measure. If you're trying to enforce culture, if you're trying to reinforce strategy, if you're trying to reinforce teamwork, make sure you build into what you're measuring so it's in the discussion to help them improve and be more aligned. Who's measured? I've seen in some companies just salaried people. Some companies includes hourly. Companies I've helped run, we're a little unusual. I involve the subcontractors and treat them as my strategically aligned one as part of the team that happen to be paid separately from the company. Who provides the inputs and who approves reviews? Those are decisions you need to make. Some companies, the owner reviews them all, smaller companies especially. Some it's just one level above the boss. Some it's just the boss. Some, frankly, it comes mostly from the employee. Sometimes it comes from a 360. The key is you need to make that decision, that choice. And again, strategically, what messages are you reinforcing? If the mission and the vision and strategy and culture are important to you, they need to be built in and measured as part of the discussion and review. But again, ideally, forward-looking for the personal growth and alignment with the company. And again, the obvious, you got to try to see how am I going to manage quality so that people feel like, well, I got this kind of boss and you got this other kind of boss and it wasn't fair. You know, that the preparation and the process has similarities. It's clear, it's fair, it's consistent, and it's accountable. So, some common mistakes, my opinion, and thoughts to consider, sort of a different perspective. One is the simple one measure mistake. You know, example, we realize later in the year that one objective, they realize 3-4 months ahead, we're not going to achieve it. You know what the problem with that is? Motivation drops. So one solution I used to do is I always had in the objectives, and sometimes the objectives would change because the company did a pivot, but if it didn't do a pivot, I'd have a minimal, which was, oh my gosh, not an absolute worst case, but pretty much a worst case. What's the minimum we have to achieve, or it's a disaster? And the reason is, if we're not having a good year, they at least don't feel like total losers. The primary one is the target, and I also always have a stretch goal. So me, I like to have 3 measures and objectives, not just one. The second mistake I see is the so-called anchored annual number mistake. You know, give you an example. It's a construction company in roofing, and it was a really bad weather year. So sales exploded. Well, the issue is it wasn't necessarily based on performance, right, and initiatives. Solution is you got to sometimes adapt the objectives, update priorities, do more status reviews, do more observations of insights, do them more often. That's why I like monthly or quarterly, frankly, reviews for most of the people, so it's forward looking. And the judgment mistakes. You know, That is, hey, I'm looking at the past, and what's obvious is, I'm the judge, the prosecutor, and the jury, and I'm talking about your attitudes and your values and your beliefs. And when you start judging those, your culture weakens, you're going to have high turnover. All they're going to do is get defensive. The solution is, for most people, be their advocate, be future oriented, and focus on the behavior you'd like to see change. Because when behavior changes, the other side of the equation is attitudes plus values and beliefs tend to follow. Shift the discussion as much as you can to advocate, and make sure you're documenting it. So, for example, when you're setting the goals, make sure they're specific. We know how we're going to measure them. They can be attained, they're relevant, they're important, and when is the target date? And then in the review, you talk about each of the goals. Which ones are closed? They either were completed or we pivoted and they weren't completed. 2, what's still active? And are they on track or they need to be modified? 3, what ones got deferred? Priorities changed or they went away? And what in general needs discussion about the current goals and the future goals? My guide in doing reviews, because I look to do as much as I can through questions, is I talk about, hey, since your last review, what actions have you taken? What discoveries have you made? What new insights do you have? What partnerships with others in the organization have you built? What are you focusing on improving? Would you be leveraging your strengths or protecting your Achilles heels? In your planning, what new insights have you found? And in the future, what new partnerships are you working to build from where they are now? And from that, I have a better understanding of what they already know, what they understand, and some insights they may be lacking, so I can help fill that in. But by them setting it up, I'm additive. I'm not subtracting. I'm demonstrating care and respect, which is the most important things in trust. And then as part of the discussion, I want to talk about the mission, the vision, and values and evaluate them on it and sharing on the different ones, which ones, hey, you're a great role model. You're almost always doing this one. These, I see you do them frequently, and I want you to continue. Here's a few that I see you do occasionally, but it's an opportunity to do even more. And then some, I seldom see this one. That one I need to improve, and go through the major ones in that way. I also like to use this as a guide to discussion, because if I'm trying to help them, I looked at statistically, how do people look at their positions, and what are their, and are they happy or not? Are they productive or not? In fact, these 12 questions, these 4 categories, there's been tons of research that demonstrates that when employees know these 12 categories and feel good about them, you have higher customer satisfaction rates statistically, you have higher profitability statistically, you have lower employee turnover statistically, and you have better productivity and teamwork statistically. So since I know these 12 questions statistically predict those 4 things, I use these questions as part of my performance review process. One, people care about, what do I get? So I get those through the questions. Do they know what's expected of them, and do they have the materials and equipment they need to do it right? What do they think? The second area is, are they clear on what they give, right? So at work, do they have an opportunity to do what they do best every day? In the last 7 days, have they received recognition or praise? Does their supervisor, me, seem to care about them as a person, and are there other people in the organization that encourage their development too? The third category is, they want to know, do I belong? So do they feel like their opinions count? That the mission and purpose of the company helps them feel good about their role and their importance in it? And do they understand their importance in it, no matter what level they're at? Do they believe the team around them is committed to doing quality? And again, do they have a good friend at work? A good friend is the one who, we all have those bad days. A good friend's the one who says, whoa, let me put that in perspective. Let's just calm down a little bit on those bad days. And the fourth category is, do they feel like they can grow? In the last 6 months, has someone talked to them about their progress? And in the last year, have they had opportunities to learn and grow? Use those 12 questions as a guide for you. Are you doing these and providing them? Use them as a guide to identifying, are you delivering? And use them as a guide to reinforce to people how they feel about these things, because statistically, when people feel good about these 12 questions, it is highly statistically predictive of profitability, employee productivity, lower employee turnover, and higher customer satisfaction. You might also add to the discussion, especially for the better employees, their future dreams, right? Ask them, what's success in your current role, right? And have them answer, and then add my thoughts to that. Things I've also seen. What do you do best? And their skills, their knowledge and talents. And after they answer that, I sometimes add more to those to show, hey, I'm an advocate. What do they enjoy most and why? And I listen very closely and play back what I think I heard so I can be a better advocate. Where are they struggling? Skills, knowledge, talent, their Achilles heel, things that they wish they could protect better, and frankly identify how I might help them in those areas. And ask them about the future. What's your perfect role? And describe why. And then I may give them feedback, either reinforcing everything they just said or giving them other options to think about. So what do great versus good leaders do typically? How are they different? And what the statistics show is, one is their perspective's different. Most leaders focus inwardly in the company, the current team, the current process, the current issues, the current what's going right, the current what's going wrong. The best leaders focus on outward. Who counts on us? And how are we adding value? And how are we improving value? And how can we improve value? Where are our strengths and our weaknesses, and how do we take care of external strengths and weaknesses? Or another way to say it, they focus on the results more than the how to get there. They focus on setting the goals of what we're trying to achieve, and a little bit less on how we get there, to let the people behind them help create and be engaged in how we get there. A huge one is how they select people. Most of us, frankly, select an experience. Why? Versus talent. World Class says it's generally easier to teach someone your industry quickly rather than to improve their skills and capabilities to fit. But here's an example of why we mostly do that. Remember, we're wired to avoid experiences we don't want. So let's picture, I've been in this situation. I'm looking for a new assistant product manager years ago. I had one that was solid, had a lot of experience. I know would be pretty good. I had one that, oh my gosh, this person, so creative, so much initiative, but had very little experience, and probably would be great, but frankly might not work out. And I remember at that time, what did I do? Well, embarrassingly, I picked the one with longer experiences. Why? Because if the person didn't work out, people are going to be saying, you idiot, you had this person with all that experience and you hired this person with no experience based on talent. But the reality is, great leaders focus more on understanding the talents and fit them in the roles that they can take advantage of those strengths and talents. The expectations they set with other people. The best leaders focus on the outcomes they want the teams and those people to achieve. Most typical is what we know best, because maybe we got to that job because we used to do it and we did a good job. So most focus on here's the right way to do it. Motivating employees. Most of us end up just seeing their weaknesses and try to help them fix it. Great leaders focus on their strengths and just try to help them protect their Achilles heel. And about people, most of us, let me help you learn the job. And my job is once you've learned it and you're doing well, help you get promoted. World class. Hey, look around the entire organization. Where's the best fit for this talent? So I've been talking about advocacy. Now, do I mean you're always an advocate? No, you get different types of employees. So my rule of thumb directionally is the top half of my employees. My role is essentially I'm an advocate. And I'm talking about the future and how I spend 85% of the time on how we're going to build off their strengths. And I spend 15% of the time on how to protect their Achilles heel. For the middle 40%, I got to be some degree of advocate, but a little bit judge, right? Because we do need them to improve. So I spend 65% with soft gloves, but ways of improving. And I spend 35% both on their strengths. And I try to do it as an Oreo cookie. I do the strengths first, some improvements second, and end on strengths. But there's some people, frankly, you know and I know, they probably don't belong here. And in this case, it's okay. My role is prosecutor and judge. I'm setting action plans, and they get to resolve these deficiencies. Whether their attitude or capability or whatever it is isn't my role to judge. I focus on the outcomes. So there's a little bit of my background. If you want to pause the video, you can take a quick look. But most importantly, you agreed at the beginning. Today would be successful for you if you gained some insight, exposure to some tools about performance reviews that frankly work better. Some insights specifically of the classic view, some options of an alternative approach, and some tools you might be able to use. Now, if you didn't like it, you probably didn't get to this slide. So I'm assuming if you're here, you liked it some, and I hope you share it with some other people and try some of it. If you loved it, celebrate it, tell everybody, and if I can ever help you and your team, please let me know. Bye.